Hey y'all, welcome to today we're going to be making Guts's sword from Berserk, specifically the Black Swordsman's sword or the sword from the Golden Age arc. Now, if you don't know Berserk, Berserk is a manga created by Kentaro Miura in 1989, and he wrote it from 1989 until he passed away last year in May of 2021. I personally found Berserk when I was about 16 or 17 years old with my friends watching anime, watching Dragon Ball Z, and absolutely loved it. And at that point in time, the anime was only through the end of the Golden Age arc. And I didn't buy the manga. I was just a student, didn't have the money. So didn't really pursue that any further until recently got back into it and made my buddy a copy of the same sword out of a piece of 2x6 for his birthday, and decided that I'm going to try to make one a little bit better, and I'm going to try to film myself doing it as best as I can so that I can share that with you. All right, so before we get started, I want to do a quick disclaimer. That disclaimer is that I am not a professional woodworker. I'm a hobbyist. This is not a how-to. This is a how I do, to steal the phrase of one of my favorite creators, Bill Making Stuff. I'm not a professional. There's going to be some people who actually know how to do woodworking who are going to see that, and it's going to be glaringly obvious, I am sure. But I'm not telling you this is the best or the only right way. It's just the right way for me. So first, we got to talk about materials. And so today, what I'm going to be using is I'm going to be using a 4/4 piece of cherry, and math, 4/4 is 1 inch, a 1 inch thick piece of cherry that I got from my local specialty store. And this one is actually a little bit longer than 9 feet. The sword itself, when it's done, is going to be about 6 foot 9 inches. So the first thing that we got to do is we got to cut this down to size, and then we're going to have to run it through the table saw to get it to the general shape of the blade. I should also say, if your saw is not old and broken and still has the blade guard, make sure that it works. Mine doesn't exist, so it doesn't work. But again, this is how I do it, not the best way to do it. All right, so the blade at its widest point is 5 inches, and it tapers down to about 4 inches right before the actual point of the sword, which is a really obnoxious cut to make because you're essentially tapering down 1/2 inch off of each side on the length. Okay, so that was great. My camera decided to shut off right as I started to do that strip cut. So just imagine that you're seeing a piece of wood going through a table saw right now. We do still have to do the taper cut. It's going to look almost identical. So, ha 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 ha. Hey y'all, so we're going to draw some of the measurements onto this blank now so that we can make our taper cut. I would like to thank on Reddit who posted the diagram that I'm using. I think it's super helpful. I think it's mostly spot on. I would note that even though I believe that in the manga, the handle of the sword is always drawn as perfectly cylindrical, generally speaking, you wouldn't actually want to have a sword with a cylindrical blade. You always want it to be kind of an oval, or if you've ever seen the handle of a katana or something like that, they always have a little bit more meat in one direction than the other so that you can get better twisting control on the blade itself. If it's perfectly cylindrical, it's easy for the blade to deflect. I need to draw stuff on my wood. I want that. I'm going to show you a little bit about how I made the jig, or just kind of explain what it is. So the fence alongside the table saw is always at 90 degrees. You always want your fence and your blade in the same exact parallel. If your fence and your blade are tweaked, if they're off, then as you run things through, you will get binding, and either you will damage your saw, or the saw will catch, it will kick the wood out, or it will pull it through, depending on how you're feeding it. And that is extremely dangerous. You don't want to do that. So you can't just like set your fence a half an inch off and hope that it'll take a taper off your blade. It also just doesn't work that way. But what you can do is you take a jig. Here I'm using the offcut from the blade itself, and I'm going to use the circular saw to take half an inch off of that to run a strip, or run kind of rip half an inch off of one edge of that. Then I'll use the square side of it and I'll attach that to the fence, or well, I'll put that against the fence, and I'll put the blade against the jig and then run it all through square. The blade itself, or the piece of wood that is the blade, will be slightly cockeyed, held in the jig, but it'll be being fed through parallel to the blade, so you don't have any binding. So again, we got to put our ears and eyes in and then do this quick rip. It's going to be a pain. Doing a long, skinny rip with a circular saw always sucks, so we're going to have to be slow, and we're going to have to be careful. Make sure, especially in longer cuts like this, and when I mean longer, I don't mean from a time perspective, not temporally longer, but when you're making a long distance cut, that you're accounting for the cord, that you're accounting for that pull, because you don't want to find yourself getting up to the edge of the table, having it getting caught on the plug, and not being able to continue your cut, getting interrupted. That makes it much, much more difficult. So I always try to pull my cord up onto the table so that it's going to be able to feed more easily as I push the blade through. You know what I was talking about? How your cord gets bound up and then you can't continue your cut. After all that, this is what I've done. All right, now we just got to flip the jig, do the same thing on the other side. All right, y'all. So now we've got our tapers cut, but I forgot to mention something. Make sure that after your first pass, you collect the offcut, and that you put that back in between the jig and your piece of wood, because you need, again, to have that square. You need to fill that negative space and make sure that your blank is again square with the jig in order for the taper to be equal on both sides, or you'd have to create a secondary jig that accounts for having the taper again. Anyway, it's not worth it. Make sure that you put your offcut in between the jig and the blank, so that when you run it through for your second taper, you end up with an identical taper. Like this. As you can see, I've got the offcut from the first taped in between the two. That way, as I fed it through, it was equal. We're going to work on cutting out the guard, the hilt, and the handle and the pommel. So the way that this is going to end up working, when you actually look at the sword itself, the guard is obviously thicker than the blade, the hilt is thicker than the blade, as Don't forget your eyes and ears, friends. Well, that's helpful. When did that happen? Bro, what is your deal? Hey. Sorry, friends. I don't exactly have the best equipment for this, because I'm new. Alright, well, that mostly sucked. Not the actual cutting part, but the fact that my camera kind of sucks. Sorry about that. Just a reminder that when this show goes live, I'm going to be auctioning off this sword on eBay. So if you're interested, I'm going to try to have like a 2-week period from when this episode goes live that you can bid on this and take it home if you want to. All the money is going to go back into the next project, so really appreciate it if you bid. Hey y'all, it kind of looks like a sword now. Check it out. Still got a ways to go, but it's kind of nice when you can look at the piece of square rectangular wood that you had and actually see a little bit of where you're actually trying to go with it. I feel like there's a metaphor, a lesson to be learned there about sticking with the process one bite, one step at a time, and something about life. And you do the rest. All right, y'all. So I've thought long and hard about the best way to cut the bevel on these edges, and it seems to me that there's not really too many great answers. We took our scrap piece of wood and we kind of refined it piece by piece. That's probably not going to focus very well. And tried to get it to the point where we actually have a pretty fine tip on it. Now, this is still not quite perfect. The angle was a little bit too deep, or rather the distance was a little bit too deep. And so if you look really closely, you can see that one side is a little bit deeper than the other. One shoulder is a little higher than the other. You don't want that in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back it off a little bit. I'll probably end up like what you see here with a little bit of a flat edge. And then that I'll just have to take out with a sander, with a block sander, which I'm not terribly excited about, but at least it'll look better. It'll be more reliable. But for now, I just have this little blank, which I think is just going to be a miniature version of Terminus Est, which is a sword from the New Earth series of books. Earth with a U. Anyway, simultaneously the best and worst and most painful to read, but also most fascinating series of books I've ever read. I don't know if I recommend it or not. So take that how you will. But my little mini Terminus Est will be going to my good buddy Carl if I finish it. Anyway, we're going to make the cuts on the actual blank itself now. All right, well, that was fairly nerve-wracking, and I'm sorry I ruined some of those shots, but safety first. And if my arm gets in the way of the camera so that I can keep all my fingers, so be it. So, you can see it got pretty close. It's not too bad. A little bit that we'll have to take out the sanding. And the tricky part is, in order to cut the bevel on the tip of the blade, I'm going to have to run it through like this, which I can't do because of the sealing. So I am going to have to cart my happy little self and my workbench outside to do 2 tiny little cuts and make that work. All right. Well, Christmas lights. Yay! Let's make these cuts. Get back inside. The process for cutting the tip, holding the blade up at that weird angle and trying to feed it through was less than precise. Doesn't appear that I overcut anything, which is good. I didn't cut too deep anywhere, but I need to finish some of the other aspects on the tip specifically, and the shoulder of the point of the tip, of the thing, of the sword, of the stuff. I need to do the things to the stuff so that then I can do more things on the stuff. And then you'll be like, whoa, look at all the stuff that he thinged. And then I'll be like, yeah, dude, it's cool. And something. All right. I don't know if I'm going to make you watch me sand yet or not. Is that something you're into? Oh, you people are into weird things. Yeah, all right. So, I don't know if you can see this, how off that bevel is to the edge. That's because this edge was slightly overcut. It was cut too deeply. So the bottom needs to come together and this edge needs to come back in order to make that line up. That is something that I was hoping to avoid when I cut the bevels on the table saw. I clearly did not avoid it. This is a pain in my tuchus. We're just going to have to work through it. probably can't see that, or I know you can't because I can see what you can see on my monitor over there. Or my laptop, rather. But that's nice and sharp. All right, well, it's not perfect by any stretch, but it's better. Not sure how much of this. You can kind of see some of the sawdust in my eyelashes. Not sure how much of this you can see, but it's starting to get fairly square. Some of those chisels, some of those bevels are looking nice and sharp and tasty. Tasty bevels. Tasty bevels. So I think at least right now, it's good enough to get to the part that I am entirely dreading, which is, again, cutting in the fuller. All right, well, I think I've built it up just about enough. I am stressed about it, but we just got to give it a shot, I guess. To quote one of my very favorite movies ever, before you jump off a building, do you want to live forever? And I would say bonus points to whoever names that movie first in the comments, but at this point in time, I'm not entirely certain that anyone will ever watch this. So, yeah, let's give it a shot. Three hours later. All right, well. That mostly sucked. Partially because apparently my router table is not holding my router firmly to the table. Yeah. So that means that as I was going, the blade was kind of changing its altitude periodically, which means that some cuts are deeper than others. I don't know how useful that was. Yeah, I kind of hate using the routing table and the router generally. Probably because my equipment's not very good. And also because it sounds like the thing dying. And if you don't know what I mean, that is a direct reference to the absolutely phenomenal movie, The Thing. And the sound that the thing makes when it's dying is keenly similar to the sound that my router makes when it's working. And it makes me want to murder my router. Anyway, not excited, but let's get to it. Don't forget your eyes and your ears. Oh, nice. Oh, cameras, things are backwards. Wait, yeah, there we go. Anyway, I have to go clean myself up. I need dinner. And so, chiseling the rest of the fuller out, cleaning that up, is going to be a task for another day. I will see you then. But you'll probably still be there in like 5 seconds when I cut to that when I edit this. All right, well, the mighty YouTube algorithm has decided that it's best for me to upload these videos or this build into multiple videos. That is the preference of the algorithm. So yeah, this will be broken into multiple videos. Love it if you'd watch all 3 of them. I'll try to put links to them in the corners of the video box creature or in the description more than likely, because that's probably easier. Hey all, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. I'm new to the whole YouTube thing, and I just try to make things that I think are cool, and hopefully you think they're cool too. If you want to support the channel, you can like or subscribe or bell or comment. Write down below what you think I should build next. If you want to support the channel financially, it'd mean a lot to me. If you want to check out my Patreon or my Etsy, I do take commissions. I'd love to build you an enormous nerdy thing as well. All the money will go back into projects, wood, blades, chisels, all the fun things. So I'd appreciate it if you have the chance, but no worries if not. Thank you so much for watching.